Welcome everyone. If you guys could please move forward and make space for people that are coming, we're about to get started. Today we have Professor Elijah Reynolds. He completed his undergrad and graduate studies in Arabic and Islamic studies and linguistics at Indiana University. After his PhD program in linguistics, he taught at Santa Clara University and Bayan Islamic Graduate School. At WVMA, he teaches Arabic, holds halaqas on the Quran, and makes coffee in his free time. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Elijah Reynolds.
Yeah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم والحمد لله رب العالمين أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Can you guys hear me okay? I have to speak up. Which one? The box one? Can you hear better? Still no audio? This one? Can you hear me better with this? I feel like I'm at a press conference. At all these. Is it set up right?
Yeah, but I think the sound is there.
I have to hold it here? Oh, wow. Okay. Well, back for more. Thanks for having me back, everybody. It's great to see everybody. Belated Eid Mubarak to you all, inshallah. How many of you were here for the last session that I gave? A good number? Okay. For those who aren't aware, I've given a couple talks about approaching the Quran in different ways. And this time is going to be a continuation of that, but it's going to be a 4 to 6 week adventure, journey, if you will, on a very specific topic. And let's see. Yeah, no, I don't see any of my students. I see one. I see those two. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about what's called ring composition. And shameless plug, I'm going to be teaching Arabic 3 starting this weekend on Sunday. We meet twice a week. We cover Surat Yusuf, and at the end of the course, we will go into ring composition, inshallah. So, how many of you have heard of this old Persian legend of the little bug in the Persian rug? Is anyone familiar with that? Okay. Once upon a time, there was a little bug. And this little bug, he lived his entire life in this beautiful Persian rug. But he wouldn't know how beautiful it was because every day, his entire life, all he met was adversity, struggles, and difficulty as he tried to navigate through the tufts of the thick carpet. It made no sense to him. Until one day, a bird swoops down, picks him up, and as he's being carried away, he looks down and he sees the most majestic pattern and design of any Persian rug in the world. Usually this story, this legend is told, this fable is told to explain the adversities that we see in our lives, the difficulties that we see. It makes no sense to us, but there is a pattern, there is a design, there is a beautiful tapestry behind it all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed for us. We just can't see it. Perhaps it's in the ghaib. But tonight I want to use this story to introduce this topic of what's commonly called ring composition or ring theory or ring structure. It's a bit of a misnomer because it's a lot richer than simply just rings in terms of the types of patterns that we see in the Quran. And classically, it was called sometimes tanasub or ilm al-munasaba, which is a really interesting word. Munasaba means to relate with something. So it's about how ayat relate with others. And tanasub would be like how ayat kind of relate to one another. In modern terms, we would call this intertextuality, this cohesion within the text. And a lot of modern scholars work on this, built on the legacy of our brilliant ulama in the past, which we'll learn about later. How many of you have seen this floating around on the internet somewhere? Raise your hand if this looks familiar. Okay, just a couple. So this is one of the more popular, I guess, exposés of what's called ring composition. And this is just Ayatul Kursi, where the beginning of Ayatul Kursi is about the attributes of Allah. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. That is, He is al-hayy and al-qayyum. These are His attributes. And normally we just read this linearly. But if we pay attention, we'll find that when we get to the end of the ayah, it talks about Allah's attributes again. You're like, oh, that's no big deal. The Quran is always about Allah's attributes. Okay. But then the second ring, the second layer, the green one, neither drowsiness nor sleep overtakes him. If you look at the second to last section or ring, and their preservation tires him not. So here's the theme where Allah is never fatigued. And then the third, sorry, I'm having trouble reading. Lost my glasses this week. He says, to Him belongs whatever is in the heavens and the earth. And then fast forward to the third to last section. It's His throne. What's that say? Thank you. His throne extends over the heavens and the earth. So you see the theme now with the expanse of the samawat wal ard, the heavens and the earth. And then the fourth to last, or fourth to the first, the second to the middle is where it talks about Allah's permission. No one can intercede on your behalf without His permission. And then the immediate, the section immediately after the centerpiece, or what we call the fulcrum, is also about Allah's power, His will. And what's interesting with this one, Ayatul Kursi, is in the very center. This is the main part when we talk about ring composition, and it's an actual ring like this. Whatever's in the middle is going to be the main takeaway, the important part. He knows what is before them and what will be after them. How encompassing His knowledge is. Now, what I find really interesting about this is it's right in the middle, and He knows what came before and what comes after. SubhanAllah. So when I first learned about this phenomenon, this is back in 2011, long time ago. And one of my students, he was a graduate student visiting from UNC, North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he came to me and said, yeah, Ustaz, have you ever heard of ring theory? I said, that sounds like some numerology nonsense. What is that? And he says, no, it's this theory, how the Quran is composed of all of these patterns. And I said, stop there. This is garbage. I don't want to hear it. It sounds like you're trying to find some number 17 or something like this. Is it 17 or 19? The 19, the cult of 19. And so I left it. But he told me the name of the author, his professor, Carl Ernst, who's also at UNC, had just published a book called How to Read a Book, or How to Read the Quran. And a couple years later, I found myself sitting on my patio here in California, reading Surah Abasa, as one does. And it just struck me all of a sudden. There's something going on underneath the surah, which, by the way, Surah Abasa is kind of all over the place. You ever feel like that bug in the rug when you're reading something and you have no idea why it's changing subjects? It's really hard to follow. Does that ever happen to anybody? When you're reading the Quran, do people read the Quran here? Anybody read the Quran? Some people? When you read the Quran for understanding, do you ever find yourself wondering, wait, why did we just change the subject? So in Surah Abasa, it's beginning talking about how the blind man comes to the Prophet ﷺ. He frowns, kind of turns away. Allah chastises him or critiques him for it. And then suddenly it starts talking about the Quran and the angels composing it. And then it starts talking about the grave. And then it says, فَلْيَنْظُرُ الْإِنسَانُ إِلَى طَعَامِهِ. Let mankind look at his food. What's that have to do with anything we just talked about? But it struck me that night that you can take the first half of the surah and lay it on top of the second half of the surah, and it thematically rhymes. I don't know if thematically is the right word. I don't know if rhyme is the right word. But there is something there, something peculiar. So I called up my friend, asked him for the name of the book again. Of course, I read it. And I found out that this is not just some modern phenomenon that, Westerners or Orientalists are studying, or in academics, but it's actually an age-old field in the field of munasaba or ilm nazm. Nazm is a word that the mufassirin, the interpreters of the Quran, use to describe this kind of, what's the word nazm, like the system or the organization of the Quran, how it's organized. So it's a subfield within that tradition, but it never really got a lot of traction. You'll find a few pages here and there from al-Jurjani or Zamakhshari or Razi. They'll dedicate some time to it, but they don't go into detail. But I've been doing a lot of reading of this, and I taught this at the university for some time to non-Muslims at that, and they really had a blast with this. And I wanted to use tonight to kind of introduce you as well to this type of reading, this type of exegesis, or I don't want to say tafsir, but it's a way to read the Quran intertextually. Because just like in human speech, the order in which things occur, there's a system to it within our language when you speak. And I'll give a little bit more context in the next lecture on this. But when you construct a word, for example, let's say the word beautiful, you've got two parts to it, beauty and full. And then if you want to create another word from that, you'd make it beautifully. And it has to occur in that sequence, and you get a specific meaning from that sequence. And if you take any one of those morphemes, those meaningful units within the word, and try to put it anywhere else in the word, well, not only is it no longer a word, you can't really make sense of it. Yeah, you see the word beauty in there, but you don't, without that organization, the system, what we call grammar, without that grammar, you can't really make sense of it much. And this is how we read the Quran very often. We read it very linearly, and we have to rely on extra Quranic resources to fill in the gaps, which we'll discuss that at some point. I don't know that we'll talk about it tonight, but mainly things like asbab al-nuzul and other types of tafsir. Okay, so I wanted to take you through Surah Yusuf. Surah Yusuf is very famous for this because it was one of the first surahs that somebody explored. I don't remember who it was, but they had found that not only is there ring composition to it, but the entire surah is actually one big ring. Okay? So we don't want to be a bug in a rug when we read this, but we'll try to go through this linearly. The beginning of the surah begins with the usual, a prologue, what we call, like an introduction. It's Allah introducing a topic. Alif Lam Mim, or Alif Lam Ra, sorry. These are the verses of the clear book, etc., etc. He's telling us, I'm going to tell you a story about Sayyidina Yusuf. What comes immediately after? The story of Yusuf, but does anybody remember? Anybody know? Ah, yeah, the dream. Which dream? Yeah, exactly. Yusuf has a dream of stars and the moon prostrating, or some scholars say planets. I prefer planets. The word used is kaukab, and it means, in some contexts, it means planet, and other means it's star. Yaqub has the dream? Yeah. Yusuf has the dream. Yaqub tells him, don't tell your brothers. Because the symbolism there is that the planets, being the brothers, will prostrate before him. They will serve him. Let's come back to this word kaukab. It's a fascinating word. What comes after this? Yeah, they plot to kill him. So this is where the brothers come up with this scheme. They're going to say that he was killed by a wolf. They were actually going to throw him in the well. Or they did throw him in the well. Then they said that he was killed by a wolf, and this big ruse, right? And then this lands Yusuf in Egypt, ultimately. What comes after that? I'm taxing everybody's memory. What's that? Okay, and then? Yeah, that's right. You read the story recently. Okay, great. So Yusuf is established in the land first. This is a really important part. It seems very brief in the Quran, where it says "Makkanna lahu, makkanna la Yusuf fil ard." That is, we planted him, or tamkeen. What is tamkeen? How do you say this? Established him, gave him a place, made him stable there. And then it moves on to the woman who tries to seduce him. And then from there, he finds himself in prison, and he interprets the prisoner's dream. And then there's a sermon, and then the king's dream, right? He interprets the two dreams of the companions in the prison, and then he's asked to interpret also the dream of the king, right? And then after this, there's the admission of guilt by the woman, and he forgives him. And then Yusuf, the phrase is used again, Yusuf is established in the earth. We establish him in the land. This is in reference to him now becoming the wazir of the granaries. I don't know what the title is called in Arabic. Huh? Yeah. So he becomes established in the earth again, just as we saw earlier. And then Joseph plays a trick. Does anybody remember the trick that Joseph plays? Yeah. He puts this cup in the bag of his brothers. The brothers come, and they don't know it's him. And he puts this cup in their bag to basically say, they stole the cup, right? And this ultimately leads to them going to get their father coming back, right? So they make this round trip. They came all the way from Canaan, all the way to Egypt, and then back. They make this circuit. And then this is the fulfillment of the dream, where they come back and they realize who who they're dealing with effectively, right? And then the Quran, then the surah ends with an epilogue where Allah talks about the importance of the story, importance of listening to the messengers when they come, fearing Allah, and all of these things. But this is the underlying structure behind it. You see, the prologue rhymes thematically with the epilogue. The second section, talking about the dreams, rhymes with two parts, which is important. The second to last, which is the dream being fulfilled, and then also the prisoner's dreams and the king's dream, which is the fulcrum. This is the center of the rings. And then the third, the brothers trick. The brothers play this trick. They throw him in the well, and then they travel to Egypt, or rather, Yusuf, alayhi salam, he is found in Egypt. And then you come to the third to last ring here in the yellow. It says Joseph's tricks. Joseph pulls his trick. He uses the cup as part of his ruse, and then the brothers return to Egypt now. Here in the blue, are you seeing my mouse? No. Joseph is established in the land, and then again, Joseph is established in the land. First, he's established in the land in Egypt when he's rescued, when he's found and sold, into slavery, into servitude rather, in Egypt. And then once again, he's established in the land when he becomes the wazir. Then the section where the woman tries to seduce him, he's imprisoned. Skipping ahead to the middle, it says the woman admits guilt and he is released from prison. And then again, the centerpiece about the prisoner's dreams. So this is a perfect case of a surah that is in its entirety a ring. That is, the beginning rhymes with the end, and then they all make these concentric rings until the central point is being made. Now you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? And a lot of people, they read this as just some kind of piece of rhetoric, like a tool of rhetoric. Oh, it's a fancy style of writing. Because we do find this in other traditions, which I'll elaborate on in a bit. But ultimately, this is part of the revelation. It's intentional. And this I'd say pattern, don't be bedazzled by it. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and a lot of people, they find themselves studying this ad nauseum. But these are the guardrails, or rather, these are the I guess it's the guidance of how to read the Quran. Okay? Now, in cases like this, it may not be that important to you because it's pretty easy to interpret this. It's a story for the most part. But so much of the Quran is not story at all. In fact, the vast majority of the Quran is not stories. I always find it interesting when people say, oh, the Quran's, the Quran teaches with stories because that's the best way to teach something. Actually, that's not true at all. Stories are one way of learning something, but it's certainly not the best or the most impactful. One of the most impactful is actually when the Quran tells you to look at something until you observe it and experience it firsthand. That is actually the most abundant topic or theme that occurs in the Quran. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, just making sure. There's a lot of people in the back. So when you're reading this way, the point of this series is going to be able to teach you how to do this without having to become, maddened by, the complexities of it. But rather to kind of set up what I would say are the expected ways of reading the Quran. That is, the Sahaba, they understood this intuitively. This method of of an oral text, we would say. This was very common, so common that some scholars call it Semitic rhetoric. Semitic rhetoric, because so much of the Semitic languages use this kind of what they call the rhetorical device to kind of structure the story in a meaningful way. I don't find that very convincing. Yes, that's true that many of them did, but I believe that the Quran is revealed in this way because so many times it helps you to make sense of what the content or the context is. What we call Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an, that is the Quran interpreting itself or helping you to understand. Okay. Now, I mentioned briefly that this is found in other traditions. I feel like I have to say this almost as a disclaimer because a lot of times I'll see it. You know, I have a book here that I'm going to share with you in a minute where they talk about the ring structure and ring composition as if it's only the Quran that does this, and it's just not the case. Yes, it's fascinating. It's very impressive. Some would say miraculous, but I don't fixate on the rings at all. In fact, I have a brother. Whenever we have a halaqa, and whenever we're in the halaqa and we come to some ayah, and I make reference to the tanasub, to the rings or something, he's like, "Oh God," he doesn't want to hear it because he feels like we're talking about just like some mathematical patterns or something. He doesn't realize that this is actually enabling us or facilitating a deeper understanding of the surah or the ayah that we're reading. And we'll try to get to that later. If not tonight, then probably the next time. So these are some of the other oral traditions where ring composition or parallelism and other types of what we call tanasub occurs in their tradition. So you see it in, well, in the Bible. It's filled, you know, the Old Testament primarily, the Hebrew Bible. There's tons of books in there where this is found, which is why it led some scholars to call this Semitic rhetoric, especially those who do biblical and Quranic studies. Um, there's a really good book, by the way, called by Mary Douglas. It's not a book; it's an essay, but it's a very long essay. It's like 200 pages, so it's a book called "Thinking in Circles." And she's really one of the pioneers. She established like these are the basic rules, like there's just 5 or 6 rules of how to read in rings. And she references the Quran, but her interest is really in the biblical narratives. What's interesting though is she does not use this design or this system of rings to draw deeper interpretations. She just treats it really as this is just a literary device, something clever almost, right? But that's not the case. And Michael Cooper's, who I'll reference in a minute, he also expands on this topic. So it's found in the Bible, Finnish oral poetry, Austronesian peoples, East Indonesia, ancient Hawaiian, Chinese poetry, Papua New Guinea, and Timor poetry. It's very common in poetry. It's really common in celebratory types of events, maybe jubilees, also funerals, or some auspicious moment is when someone would craft a poem or something using this type of quote unquote ring structure. Now, the Quran, when it uses it, as I mentioned, it actually there's a lot of complex layers to it, and I don't want you to become kind of specialists in that or anything, but it will facilitate a deeper reading of the Quran. Okay. So Michael Cooper's is also, I believe he's a Muslim. Yeah, he's a Muslim. Him and Raymond Faris, they both write on, Raymond Farron, who's in Kuwait. He's a Muslim scholar in Kuwait. Both of them work on ring composition. In fact, I'm going to share this book with you here. If you're interested in the topic, like getting deeper into it to read on it, it's Structure and Quranic Interpretation: A Study of Symmetry and Coherence in Islam's Holy Text. This is a very thorough and exhaustive book that goes. It's very thin, but he basically breaks down a dozen or so surahs in their ring compositions and other types of structures, not just ring composition, which I'll show you in a minute. By the way, this is the the book that I initially snubbed my nose at, like, oh, I'm not reading this, but it's How to Read the Quran, and it's a fantastic book. It's about more than simply ring composition, but he delves into ring composition in there as well. It's also a very good book on the topic. There's also a website that I encountered a few years ago, and it's called Heavenly. I think it's called Heavenly Order. Heavenlyorder.com. Is that right? Heavenly Order. What do you think of it? Yeah, he goes on other tangents. Yeah. He's a very interesting guy. I don't know him personally, but from his writings, and I subscribe to his newsletter. I don't have time to kind of read it, unfortunately, but I was very supportive in the beginning. Oh, wow, somebody's dedicated a whole site to studying and mapping out basically all of these surahs. And you can go to the site and he lists out every surah, maybe every surah that I've looked for on his site, I have found there. Now, it doesn't always line up with how I have maybe read it, but that's kind of the interesting part with studying ring composition is it doesn't have to line up. Everybody's reading of it doesn't have to line up. But why is it important? I'm going to do my best to read this very small print. Michael Coopers makes this claim in his book or his article on Semitic rhetoric, where he says rhetorical analysis, just basically any kind of tafsir that is not looking necessarily at the historical events or the grammar, which is what most tafsir, they look at the grammar, but this is rather looking at the pragmatics, which we'll talk about later. The rhetorical analysis, this type of tafsir, has not only an aesthetic purpose, as with any exegetical method, it aims above all at a better understanding of the text. Traditional commentaries proceed mostly on a verse-by-verse basis. Does anybody here ever read tafsir, literature, commentaries? Raise your hand if you read commentaries of the Quran. Yeah, what's a tafsir that you read? Ma'arif al-Qur'an, yeah? Ma'arif al-Qur'an. This is Uthmani? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I see it. It's a big volume, right? Yeah, I think we have a copy here. Anyone else? What other tafsirs do you read? This one is actually really interesting. He does not simply stick to like asbab nuzul or historical things. He dives deep into the meanings. I think he's from the school of Islahi and al-Farahi, a South Asian strand of tafsir or commentary that really examines or studies the Quran as one cohesive unit, right? Most ulama historically did not study it that way. They would read it atomistically, line by line. And you can get lost in the weeds there. You can get lost in the rug. Yes, it's beautiful and every word is immaculate and you're getting ajr for every letter that you're reading. But if you step back and take the bird's eye view instead of the bug's eye view, you'll be able to have a deeper appreciation. And I can tell you, I don't know any modern or contemporary scholars or from the 20th century that have a deeper understanding of this, of the Quran than al-Farahi and Islahi. These scholars who really built their commentaries around the Nazm al-Quran, the Tanasub al-Quran. So he continues, that is, they read it word by word, verse by verse. Every verse is discussed individually, usually without taking into account its immediate literary context, which to me is the most important context. What comes right before it, what comes right after it. So many times you'll hear polemicists or apologetics, Christians who will come and say, oh, see, the Quran is talking about killing the infidels where you find them. Well, you've seen these, right? So read the ayah after that, or at least before it, to have a better context. You'll understand this is clearly in a time of war, and it's establishing very strict rules of war, which, by the way, you don't find in the Christian tradition or in the Jewish tradition. You don't find this in any other tradition. Islam, the Quran establishes rules of war, right? Which is why, I mean, I don't want to point fingers, but some countries, they send their militaries for decades and slaughter millions of people, and they come back and say, oh, well, war is hell. It's like they can turn their morality on and off like a switch. Why? Because it's not rooted in their scripture. Our scripture details very explicitly what you can and cannot do. Right? It's really fascinating that the Quran does this. Yet we're called the religion of violence, right? Because we have a prophet that taught us, no, even in war, you must be compassionate. Even in war, the most brutal point of a human's existence, you must be merciful. You must show compassion. You're not allowed to fight an enemy if they're unarmed. Inshallah, we don't ever have to fight. But a part of our fiqh is we do not fight enemies who are unarmed, and obviously not civilians. Right? It goes without saying, or it should go without saying. Anyway, that was a tangent of mine. But the point being that people who read it atomistically, finding, one verse here and one verse there, taking it out of context, or even worse, they'll say, maybe not worse, but also they'll say, oh, the Quran makes no sense. It's just jumbled words of a madman. Astaghfirullah. Well, because you're reading it like a bug. You're not reading it like a bird. You need to step back and see it's in its context. Anyway, so he finishes with a slight criticism here. He says, now we know the danger of taking a sentence of a verse out of its context. In the majority of Quranic commentaries, and this is true, the literary context is generally replaced by its historical or supposedly historical context of the asbab nuzul. Does anyone know what the asbab nuzul are? I think I asked this last time. Yeah. Yeah, some say the instances of revelation or causes. I don't like the word cause, but it means like the context in which they were revealed historically, right? The prophet is in a cave and this surah comes down, right? The problem with these is, this is maybe a dirty truth nobody likes to tell you, is a lot of these are not authentic, but they do make for nice stories to fill in the gaps. In fact, you've heard of the Sirah of Ibn Ishaq, which is a fascinating work. It's the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. Some scholars have looked at this and they say, it's mostly, I don't say fables, but it's not history. If you look at old Ottoman records of curriculum for ulama, they don't study the Sirah. The Sirah is something that you learn growing up, and maybe as a moral compass, moral guide for you. But it's not something that ulama rely on. And the reason for that is because so much of it is, we know that it's kind of copied from Israeliyat, Jewish and Christian stories that kind of been mapped onto to the Islamic tradition. And so that doesn't make it a bad piece of literature or genre. But we have to know its limits, what we can and cannot do with it. And some scholars looked at the work of Ibn Ishaq and others who write the Sirah, and they said the Sirah is actually not a biography of the Prophet, but rather a biography of the Quran. Because we're trying to understand ayat that are really difficult to understand. So we have to build this kind of context around it. Now, it's not to say that it's fabricated stuff. I'm not saying it's fabricated at all, but I'm saying that a lot of it is not authenticated. How about that? So what does that mean then? How do we read the Quran if we don't know with certainty what was the historical context? Well, we have the intertextuality right in front of us, right? That helps us interpret it as well. There's a really fascinating book by, I think he's a closet Muslim. His name is Juan Cole, Dr. Juan Cole. Guy is so prolific. He's written 40, 50 books on the topic. He has a book called Muhammad, Prophet of Peace in a Time of War, something like this, where he says, yes, we're aware of the historical or the historiography of the Sirah and this tradition, but what if we tried to read or develop a Sirah based on the Quran? It's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it. A little hard to read. He uses a lot of big words, but it's a good one. Juan Cole. Okay. I think I'm at time here, but I want to move on to the last section. The next time that we meet, inshallah, if you come for the next one, we'll go through some surahs, but there are at least three, actually, I think there are in total three basic patterns that we see the Quran, different surahs being structured in. One is parallelism, where you'll have the first, second, and third sections be, well, paralleled again in the same order, first, second, and third, which is Surah Abasa is one of those. There's also a mirroring, which is what we just saw, where it's sorry, we saw the ring, but we see a mirroring where it's A, B, C, and then C prime, B prime, A prime, where it reverses the order. Now these are not they're not always thematically rhyming, but they're always relevant to one another. Okay. And so what I want to be able to do is take you through a journey looking through different surahs to be able to discover it on your own, but then also working together to come up with a crowdsourced tafsir, as it were. Okay. I'll stop there just so we have time for questions. Jazakallah khairan. Yeah. About this topic? Oh, there are several. In English? Yeah, in English, I can recommend a few. One is you can look for this essay by Mary Douglas if you're interested in non-Quranic, I guess, references, and that's called "Thinking in Circles." Michael Cooper's article is fantastic. It's really, really good. It's called Semitic Rhetoric. There's again this one, How to Read the Quran, and then I highly recommend this one. This is probably where you want to start. But this one, I'll tell you, it's a bit mechanical, almost robotic. I mean, he's a Muslim and he's all about this ring theory life. Like he's really into it. But the structure of the book is very kind of mechanical. But it's a very good book if you really want to kind of see it laid out. In fact, he demonstrates how not just every surah has a ring composition, but the Quran itself is one big ring. It's really extraordinary. I'll walk you through that maybe towards the end. That's the hook to get you to come back maybe to the fourth lecture. Yeah, in the back. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear the last part. I was thinking of the sword verse. The sword verse? 9:5. But that has like a really obvious historical context. But can you give an example of like maybe a verse that's been revealed in some narrative that's actually not really I can only think of examples where it was pretty clear what so does everybody understand the question? Give some examples where the asbab nuzul or the historicity around the Quran or the events of the time were inauthentic or maybe found to be not true. When I say inauthentic, I mean I want to be careful here. Not inauthentic. I want to say not authenticated. They did not go through the same rigorous process as the hadiths. Hadiths are extremely rigorous in authenticating the historicity of those events. And even those are problematic at times. So the qasas or the stories, or in Asbab al-Nuzul, is a rather late genre of or type of tafsir, maybe 150 years after the life of the Prophet ﷺ is when this emerges. Not a lot of good chains of transmission there. I'm almost reluctant to. I found about the spider. No, no. Okay. My wife's gonna be so mad. What's that? She's watching. So you know about the story of the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr in the cave, and there's a spider that weaves a web over the mouth of the cave. The Quraysh don't come in. They say, "Oh, there's no one in there. Spider is this spider's web indicates to us that there's nothing in there, right?" Right? And there's I forget the ayah, but some say this ayah was revealed about that event, right? This is found in the Midrash, the Jewish, kind of the Jewish tafsir of the story of Dawood, alayhi salam. They even have the name of the spider. And so the story goes that Dawood was becoming very popular amongst his people. He was this general, slaughtered thousands of his enemies. And the king at the time, Saul, was worried that Dawood, was going to become more popular than his son, who was to take the throne. Dawood caught wind of it. He and a group of a militia decided to flee in the middle of the night. And they camp out in a cave. And they're hiding in the cave. And then Dawood looks down and he sees, they're just biding time, right? He looks down and he sees this spider. And he's like, "Ya Allah, why would you create such a low creature like this? Of all of the beautiful things you create this spider." And as a lesson to Dawood, that spider saves their lives because the militia, the Saul sends an army out to find him. They encounter this cave and they see the spider web over the mouth of the cave. I hope I didn't just ruin a lot of people's childhoods. This is not an authentic story. Right? You'll find other ulama who talk about this. They don't necessarily bring in the context around the midrash. Thank you. But it's pretty well established that this is not an authentic story. This would be a case where the asbab al-nuzul are not necessarily reliable. But when I say that they're not authenticated, I mean it's like it's hit or miss. In other words, if you really want to hang your hat on it, I mean, you got to be a historian. But Allah doesn't expect us to be historians to be able to understand His word, right? He expects us to read the signs. And so I find it, I'm fascinated with, all of the Islamic studies. I did my master's in Islamic studies. I studied with a lot of different scholars on these topics. But the one that I keep coming back to is anything with the Quran where it makes me reliant in reading the Quran. I'm not a Quranist, by the way. I love hadiths. I'm just I take them very seriously, right? When people just whip out a hadith and say, "Oh, the Prophet ﷺ said this." Oh, I find that really dangerous. Because the ulama, they would always say, "According to so-and-so, it was said that the Prophet had said this. According to so-and-so, according to so-and-so, we heard someone say that they heard the Prophet say this." Not, "Oh, the Prophet ﷺ said this." And then they end with, "Wallahu a'lam." Because they are not stupid. They're epistemologically very intelligent. They know I'm not there to see it. But I trust the transmission. I trust the people who transmitted it to me. Right? So I went on. I hope that I answered your question. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That's right. Yes. So hadiths that are found in the Sahih canons are obviously authenticated. And when they talk about revelation, then yes, we rely on that. What we're talking about is a type of tafsir that's called asbab al-nuzul. It's very problematic. We actually have, there's a fantastic website for this, but it's in Arabic though. It's the mawsu'a. It's the collection of all of the salaf, that is the sahaba, the tabi'in, and the tabi'in, their commentaries to every ayah. It's an extraordinary work. It's an extraordinary work. You look up one ayah, and it's 30 pages of commentary for one ayah. It's insane. It's a wonderful work, and you have all of these authenticated reports about the context in which it was revealed, or the implied meaning that the Sahaba were privy to. Yeah.
You mentioned that the Islam was problematic. I imagine it feels like it's a blanket statement, but I think it's probably not. So would you say like all of the revelations that have been found or the context of the are not authenticated or not as strong, or is it a few? Is it some of them, or just more context, or if you could elaborate?
If I understand the question, it's how much of the asbab al-nuzul are reliable.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. I would venture a guess, not 3/4, not 2/3. I haven't done a lot of research into it. I just know that most ulama recognize that asbab al-nuzul are not the primary source. They're not a primary, what we call a primary source. It's a secondary source at best. It doesn't mean don't read it. I'm just saying be careful with it. What you actually have at your disposal is the Quran and commentaries about the Quran that you find maybe in the hadiths, but I feel like that's cheating sometimes. I feel like the Quran is like, I'm supposed to understand this. I'm supposed to think deeply about it, not go and see what somebody else had to say. I have to do the work, like reading a tafsir. I don't read a tafsir until after I've really studied an ayah or a surah deeply and come to whatever conclusions I come to. And then I go and read the tafsir. And the reason I do that is, one, I don't want to just, I don't want to say blindly follow. I want to make sure that I understand. And a lot of times you'll read a tafsir or a commentary and you'll say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And then you just go along with it. But you never actually did the work. It's like having a math textbook, but you just go to the back and copy the answers. Like, well, you got the answers, but you didn't do any of the questioning. Do you really learn anything? Anyway, yeah.
We talked about historical context, and why it may not always be the best. But contrasted in what you put is literary.
Mhm.
How do you define that?
When we say literary context here, we mean the ayah before it, the ayah after it, like the ayahs in the surah, especially. So you read very locally first. That's the context or the intertextuality, right? And of course, there's a historical context in which the revelations come down, but the difficulty with that is we're not there for it. So I think even if we have this kind of reliability system where we have hadiths, I think epistemically it's difficult, right, to make any kind of assertions about historical events because it's not possible to witness it. And I think there's a hikmah in that Allah created it in this way that we can't go back in time and see it. Right? One, it forces us to rely on systems of trust with other people and honesty and whatnot. But two, also, I think it forces us to observe, uh, like use our aql to make observations now. And so, reading the Quran, it's not something that you do as like a hobby or um, um, you should take it seriously. I think everybody takes it seriously, so it goes without saying. Yeah, so that's what the context is. Literary context means the ayahs that are around it, or other surahs even. Yeah. Yeah, it's usually when there's not a central theme that, and we'll learn about this as we go, but the theme is the ABC pattern itself, the sequence itself. And the point of it is to show or to demonstrate, in my opinion, that the Quran is teaching us to um, see things in other things. I know that sounds kind of weird, maybe Sufi-ish or something. But when you say, I see myself in you, right? To my kids, I see myself in my kids. I don't literally see myself in my kid. But what is it that I'm actually seeing? I'm seeing signs of myself in them. And the Quran, I think, relies heavily on that in teaching us to be able to see not just ayat in the Quran within other ayat, but ayat in the cosmos, ayat in the world around us. If you recall, this is what one of our what talks was about a few weeks back, reading ayat in the creation. That when Allah says, you know, watini wa zaytun wa turi sinin, the fig and the olive. I heard a scholar once say, you know, a visiting scholar come and say it's because of the glycemic index or something. I'm like, the Sahaba didn't know anything. I guarantee the Sahaba knew this better than us. But you think they knew about glycemic index? Get out of here. That's not what. So anyway, I should not be so critical. But the point being that when the Quran tells us to make observations of signs in the creation, it's not simply um, to wow us, like, oh wow, Allah is so powerful. Obviously, He's powerful, but there's signs in that creation itself that are related intimately with the surrounding ayat. For example, in Surah 13, I think we covered that in our last one. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes.
I don't know exactly how you're making that. Are you, when you say that we're going to explain a verse, has an objection in terms of verses around it, like contextually, are you doing that strictly in the text, or are you actually going into history?
Usually the latter often. To explain just within the text, sometimes it's not easy because they don't have the context they don't have the Islamic context. I don't know if that makes sense, but they don't really understand our language a lot of times. So when we say slave of Allah, they're like, oh, you know, like, no, that's a good thing. So it's hard on that way. What I'm distinguishing here is between history versus anecdotes, and the asbab nuzul is about anecdotes, right? History in broad terms. Um, Iran or Persia was at war with the Romans, right? That was a historical context. The Quraysh tried to assassinate the Prophet. That's a historical context. But getting into the minutia of, well, yeah, Aisha was on this road, it's really difficult to establish any veracity or like truthful, confirmation in those. I think you guys are more interested in the asbab nuzul and its limits than you are the ring composition. So inshallah, maybe we will have a discussion on this next time, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا المرسلين. Ya Allah, bless this gathering. Ya Allah, bless our community. Make us beacons of light. Ya Allah, make us stewards of this deen. Ya Allah, do not make us a fitna for the enemies of Islam. Make us guides to Islam for them. Ya Allah, bless and protect our brothers and sisters in Palestine, in Sudan, in Congo, in Kashmir, and Iran, and any place where there is suffering, regardless of their race, gender, or religion, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
that is donated to Siraat, by the way, to help sustain us. So the more that you purchase from them, the more that we also get to support us, this eating. So that's great. So we also have both pot sandwiches and brew theory. So the sandwiches that are made fresh, halal, and coffee. And a community dua request, our community member, the uncle of Sister Roma, passed away, so please make dua for him. And a janazah will be tomorrow at MCA at Local time, and it will be followed by a burial in Hayward. So thank you so much, everybody. And then inshallah we'll be having another through both those doors for the sisters, and the men can go all the way outside, so just follow each other for that. There's gonna be the women's bathroom on the left side from me, and the men's bathroom on the right side, just these doors. Thank you so much. See you next week, inshallah.
Sorry, so before everyone leaves, we have, mashallah, Brother Terry here with us today. He's going to be taking Shahada, and so we'll all sit and be witness to that, and we pray, inshallah, that Allah guides him and keeps his heart strong in the faith, inshallah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. You hear okay? Okay. So Brother Terry is here from my brother. So, really excited about this. I remember my first Shahada, and every time I see a Shahada from anybody in the community, it's hard to not cry. So I'll try to keep my composure. But Terry, you understand what the Shahada is, the testimony of faith, that we bear witness that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is his final messenger. And that all of the prophets, the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet Muhammad validates, confirms all of the previous prophets, and he was the final prophet. And you believe in the angels and the books and the prophets and our qadar, the angels I said, and the day of judgment. Repeat after me. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness, there is no God but God. Muhammad. Takbir. 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 Only be the first one to be.